Yeah, school is sort of tough. I heard my teachers say the N-word. The teachers make jokes. I heard the students say the N-word. The end thing is you don't really know what to do. Everybody says the N-word. You don't want to overreact to it. My communication skills wasn't that great. I didn't learn how to respond to that kind of shit. Things kept running through my head. Am I overreacting? Am I being dramatic? Do people think I'm crazy for standing up? In primary school, me and my little sisters were the only Sudanese. I think that's when I first experienced racism. That's when I first started getting angry. That's when I first started fighting, getting in trouble. Yeah, I found it a bit tough.
Every one of the 40 African diaspora young people who participated in this research project had experienced racism at school, but not one of them knew of any formal processes for reporting racism in their school. In the absence of formal reporting processes, students had developed a range of informal strategies in response to experiencing racism. The participants in this study described a range of different strategies they used to respond to experiences of racism, including, firstly, the student reporting their experience to a teacher and feeling that nothing was done in response. The student reporting their experience to a teacher and then being made to feel responsible for the incident that they reported. The student reporting their experience to a teacher and actions being taken by school staff to ensure that the perpetrator understands that racism is not acceptable. The student anticipates that the school won't respond to reporting their experience of racism, so they choose not to report their experience. The student talks to friends or family about their experiences of racism. In some instances, a parent or caregiver would then advocate to the school on behalf of the student. The student takes it on themselves to respond to the perpetrator of racism. This could be in verbal or physical forms and often results in negative consequences for the student who has experienced racism. The student feels there is no way to address racism. And finally, the student internalises racism.
There were no real methods to report racism. Whenever I experienced it, mainly what I think of is teachers saying things that were very out of pocket and racist. And especially in those situations, you feel like you can't do anything because they're above you, the teacher, you're meant to be respectful to them, and you don't necessarily expect that same respect from them. And I think there needs to be methods that tackle that discrepancy.
To be honest, I didn't. I took it on my shoulders, I guess, and I took the initiative. And looking back, I don't think that's right, because as a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, you're so young, there shouldn't be a burden on you to fix such a huge issue.
There was no concrete process of reporting racism. It's kind of fell to the teacher that I felt most comfortable talking to about it. And that just happened to be the only African teacher at the school. I feel like that should not be the case, because just like any other teacher, he's been brought on for a reason. They've been brought on for a reason. And if that reason isn't to deal with racism and they aren't given the tools and have the tools to handle that, then nothing will change.
At school, when I did experience it, at first I used to not report it because from my primary school experience, they never took it serious. So when I went to high school, I didn't report it until I started getting in trouble for it. Like, I would overreact, I would even get into fights, and then I realized that that's what the students wanted. They wanted a reaction. And eventually I decided to go to the teachers and see what they would do, like if they would actually act upon it. But they never did. They would try to gaslight or switch the rules and try to pin it on you, or say oh, they didn't mean it in that way, you're overreacting. So I think after that, I just never reported it again.
Personally, I never really reported it because I just didn't feel the need, because for something to be changed, they need to first understand, and I never felt like they really understood. But I know a lot of kids, or like my own siblings, they tried to report it, but it was never taken seriously. It was always brushed off or given to somebody else, and it would have kept on being given to somebody, and nothing would actually happen.
I went to a pretty multicultural school, and I was surprised about how obvious the racism was. It's like they weren't even trying to hide it. And there wasn't really, I don't actually know any schools that had processes in place to address racism in school. And so when it did happen to myself and other fellow students, it was kind of brushed off or downplayed. Or maybe they will do some makeshift meeting and the solutions weren't making, I guess, the incident any better. It was, I guess, making it worse because it gave the aggressor, like, I feel like more room to, I guess, continue because they know that the consequences were virtually non-existent.
There were no processes really put in place or concrete processes to deal with it. I think growing up, because racism was such a taboo subject, that people just tried to avoid it rather than deal with it, try to brush it to the side rather than deal with it, try to kind of put it under the rug and deal with it later. I think maybe because of how casual Australians in general seem to be, a lot of it would think to come across as, I guess, friendly or not really that serious, when in reality it does hurt people and it really does have an effect on people in the long run. But as a young kid, you don't really know who to turn to, you don't really know who to report it to. And because you're not reporting it, they imagine that you're completely fine when you're not. So there wasn't any process that I could really follow or other young kids could really follow to feel like they had that support.
This video does not attempt to offer solutions to developing school processes for responding to racism, as this is a complex endeavour that requires nuance for individual school sites and contexts. Some of the things that you might consider at your school when developing approaches to respond to racism include: who can students at your school site report racism to? Through what means can students report racism, such as online forms or in person to teachers? Are there ways in which students can make anonymised reports of racism? Does your school need different processes for reporting and responding to racism depending on who is perpetrating the racism, for example, a staff perpetrator or a student perpetrator? Are there people at your school whose students know are specially trained in racism and responding to racism? What processes does your school follow when racism is reported? Are there educative processes for responding to perpetrators of racism?